Well, and I'm sure we're going to find out who's first online today.
But I don't have an account, so it doesn't tell you when I join.
Hey, you know what? Don't hate the player, man. Just, accept and move on. Or be humble, as your Kendrick guy says. I actually like that song, by the way. All right, there it is. Link in the chat. Mute yourselves on Zoom, please, and I will see you on the other side. All righty. First things first is to make sure that you guys can hear me. Alan fucking killing it with the #1 slot. He's like the fucking MVP of this stuff. You want to learn how to get onto YouTube as fast as possible? Talk to this dude, right? All right, let's see where we at. Woo! All right, so you should be able to hear me. It's looking like, yep. All right, cool. So, back to Ableton. So, let's do a very, very, very quick review of some of the things that we went over. I don't want to get too much into the basics because we've already covered a lot of that stuff. I want to get to warping, which is way more fun. And it's part of the syllabus anyway, so that's probably the next thing we're going to go over. So let's do this. You open up, you got 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks, as well as a reverb and delay return, which are connected to these sends at the bottom over here. All right, send A, send B goes to return A, return B. And you have a master fader, which is just like your regular master fader. And on the master fader, you have these things called scenes, remember? Right? A scene is an entire row of clips. And if you can't, so if the volume sounds low, get off of Zoom and just stay on YouTube, because sometimes some phones or computers, when you have Zoom and YouTube open up at the same time, it'll reduce or duck one of them. So if you can't hear me loud enough, get off of Zoom and just come back whenever we're done on YouTube. So we've got, let's just jump right in, right? So we got a tempo over here, up in the corner, 4/4. Right here is your metronome. I'm about to make a very, very basic beat. So in order to do that, I have to set up my metronome first. So I turn it on, and I make sure that there's a count in of at least 1 bar. So that'll give me at least 4 counts before it goes into any kind of recording state, right? Now, underneath that, there was the tone of the click drum as well as the rhythm. We've already gone over this. And then one of my favorite features, which is enable only while recording, which means that when I hit the play button, I will not hear the metronome. Only when I'm recording will the metronome be audible. It's a really cool feature, and I wish more DAWs did that, to be personal, to be honest. So let's go ahead and click on the MIDI track and load up some drums. So let's see. Yeah, let's go with a very simple 909, right? Double click, and it loads onto the MIDI track. Right? And then what I can do is I might as well I don't want to reach over to my keyboard right now. I want to play on my computer keyboard. So we know how to do that. We go to the top right corner over here, and this little button allows you to use your computer keyboard as a MIDI keyboard. So right now, if I record enable and I press the letter A, you'll see that down here, well, first of all, you might be noticing like, wait, I can't hear anything. You're pressing the letter A, but I'm not hearing any sound. But you will notice if you keep your eye on the top right corner and these 2 little squares over here, the top square is flashing whenever I click on a key on my computer keyboard. Remember that this is your indication that MIDI is being received. So there is MIDI being received. So there's nothing wrong with my keyboard. And then if I still can't hear anything, I would say, is it record enabled? To which I can see, yes, it is record enabled. If I still don't hear anything, then I must be in the wrong octave. Remember that MIDI keyboards are just like pianos. You have multiple octaves, And depending on which instrument you load onto the track, some instruments are only within a certain octave, some instruments are within a few octaves, and some instruments don't start until like C0 or C1 or C2, right? Certain octaves may have sound, certain octaves may not have sound. So if I press on the key, and if you notice down here that there's a little yellow flash going off on the actual instrument, but you can see that there's no sample assigned to C3, right? You can see that there's nothing loaded here. Just a heads up, this is what's called a drum rack, and we'll get into that later on how to create your own. But we're not hearing any sample because there's nothing assigned to the key C3. So I need to take my computer keyboard down a whole octave. To do that, I press the letter Z. Z takes the octave, takes the MIDI keyboard down an octave, or the computer keyboard down an octave. X moves it up an octave. And then the letters C and V control velocity. C is for reducing velocity, V is for increasing velocity. Now, most of you already have MIDI keyboards at home, so you won't have to worry about this. But in case you don't, the computer keyboard is a really, really good alternative. So I'm going to press the Z button once. So I'm going to take it from C3, press Z, to C2. So now I got some cymbal, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to take it down one more octave, and now I'm at C1, which is where our beloved kick drum is. Now that I've got it in the right octave, you can see that I got the kick drum, I got the snare, I got everything I need. Right? Everything's here. So let's go ahead and record a basic beat. Let's choose a tempo first. Let's see. I'm just going to take it off this real quick. All right, let's go with that. Let's go ahead and record something. All right, so I recorded a little loop, or rather I recorded a little segment. Now, right now, the view at the bottom is the effect view or the plugin view. If I press Shift Tab, it switches over to the MIDI view where I can see all the kick drums that I recorded. Now I should probably quantize this, so I'm going to select them all by just clicking anywhere in the field and pressing Command A. That selects all the notes. Then I'm going to press Shift Command U to open up the quantization menu. And I believe I did eighth notes, so I'm going to hit OK, and they're going to snap to the grid. All right, so now we definitely need some type of hi-hat going into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overdub some hi-hats. So I think my computer keyboard might not be fast enough to actually react. So I'm going to switch over to this real quick. So it looks like I missed one, so I can hold Option, click and drag. Do the same over here, reduce the velocity. And it's not perfectly in time, so I need to quantize this, Shift Command U, but this is 16th notes. So change it to 16th. Okay, we're getting somewhere. So there you go. Got a basic drum beat going. Let's go on to another MIDI track and add some bass. So if I go to Sounds and add bass. Oh, you know what? Let's not start with bass. Let's start with some pads. So let's see what this does. Oh, got a record enable. Now, it's a little finicky because, and that's cool, it's got a vibe to it, but I'm not going to go with this one. Let's go with this. Load this on. The reason I didn't choose that was because the pitch, it seemed like there was like a lot of like in-between pitches, and I want something a little bit more accurate. Too much. Let's go with Celestial Pad. They never go wrong. Something basic like that. I'm going to change it to Atmos. Very, very basic. I just learned that chord progression like a couple of months ago, and it's been like pretty stuck in my head. It's like, if you don't know, it's like a C major to an E major, which is very interesting. And then it goes to an F major, which is very interesting. And then an F minor. I learned this from this guy, Rick Beato. He was organizing some song or breaking down a song. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool progression. So there you go. We got some pads going. I have it in a 4-bar loop. So that's pretty solid right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these audio tracks because I'm going to add some bass to it. And for that, I press Shift-Command-T to add a MIDI track. Then I choose a bass. Really? You're going to fucking interrupt my creation? Okay. Hey, Evan, we're on YouTube. Link is in the chat. All right. So let's add some bass. Load up this. Record enable. Let's do that. Now, why the hell is my computer stressing out? How many things do we have open here? Boom, 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 boom. So make that a 4-bar loop, and there you go. We got some basic rhythm going, right? Crop sample so that it's 4 bars, and then we have a scene. Let's see, I'm just gonna save this so that warpy. All right. So there you go. Recording some basic MIDI is pretty easy to do in Ableton. Now, the one thing that you might have noticed is that if I wanted to overdub, or if you want to do any kind of recording within the session view, it's this button right here. Right? This is the record button right here. You might have noticed that I was clicking on that the whole time. But this record button is for when you want to record into the arrangement view, which I'm not really using right now, and I'm not going to. Right? So we got We got some components here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these drums and show you a little cool thing. So right now, these drums are pretty basic, right? Right? Nothing wrong with them. They're pretty cool, but I just want to show you some ways in which you can get a little bit more creative in your what do we call it? Songwriting. So if you go into Ableton, the browser, and you go into this section over here called Grooves, right? Now what you have is a bunch of different styles, rhythm styles, all broken down into these little tick sounds right here. You hear that? Right, so you have jazz swing, right? So you might be wondering, well, what does that got to do with anything? It's just a bunch of styles and rhythms in tick form. Well, the cool thing is that you can map your loops and your snippets onto these grooves. Yeah, that's right. Map your loops onto those grooves. So what do I mean by that, really? So let's take a basic example. Let's take some swing. Let's find a swing, and we got to go 16th notes, right? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this swing style, and I'm going to double click it. And what happens then is it opens up what's called the groove pool. This is where you can load up all of the different types of grooves that you might want to use in your session. It's called a groove pool. And you can load it up with a bunch of things. So if I wanted to go back to that jazz swing one, I could load that up. I could load something else up. Right? Whatever. This is just a groove pool, right? Now, what I can do is that if I go to my view over here, the MIDI clip view, you might have noticed like there's so many different things to look out for in this little section. And the reason why I haven't gone all into them is because it helps to learn based on functionality, right? I could tell you what a lot of these things do, but it doesn't make any sense to you without any context. Now, within this, you might notice this little thing called groove written right here. Now, check this out. If I click on the None pull-down menu, you see those 3 grooves that I had loaded into my groove pool show up here now? Well, you might be wondering why. Well, because if I select it and then I play the drums, whoo! So I think it should be 8th notes. I like the jazz one. So, does that sound interesting to you guys? So the idea is that what the original drums, remember, the original drums were this. Very straightforward drum beat, right? But what's going on today? Why is my computer all bugging out? I'm not sure what's going on. I'll figure that out. Oh, I know what it is, because we're recording the Zoom thing. It's taken up... Yeah, that's what it is. I'm going to have to talk to somebody about that. All right, so that was the original drums, right? Check it out. The original drums. Very straightforward beat. But when I change the groove to the jazz, check out what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see how it gets way more groovy, if you will. Yeah, I'm actually gonna stop this recording. I'm sorry. This is really annoying. All right. I'll record it when we come back to Zoom, but for now I don't need it. But you see how you can change up a drum beat just by loading up a different groove, a groove file. So what's happening is your MIDI track, right? All these MIDI notes is being processed through this groove pattern called Jazz 5/4 Swing Cool 8th, right? So let's look for another one. Let's look for another 8th note one. Let's see. We got Swing Logic 8th notes, right? So I loaded that into the groove pool, and now I'll change it from Jazz Swing to Swing Logic 8th notes. So that's a swing one. Then the jazz. And then we can go back to the original. 2, 3, 4. Right? So it's really, really cool. You can get way more creative. If you're not like a full-on rhythm person, or you don't fully understand the theory and stuff like that, then this is a great way for you to get creative without knowing fully how to do swing or how to actually play drums. It does it for you. It maps your MIDI onto the groove files. It's a really cool way to do it, right? Now, what was happening was these MIDI notes were running through these groove files in real time. But what you can do, if you're like super happy with this particular groove, you can actually commit to it. So now that you've chosen your groove, you're like, you know what? I like this. I want to commit to it. Let's go ahead and do it. So this little arrow right here will commit your MIDI files through this groove file. So watch what happens. As soon as I hit this commit button, all these MIDI notes are going to shift position to that swing groove that we were hearing the whole time. So 1, 2, 3. See that, how they moved? I'll do one more time. 1, 2, 3. And now this MIDI track is re-rendered in the groove pattern that it was previously running through. It's now basically the groove that we heard. Oh, I did it on the wrong one, but it doesn't matter either way. You can do it on this one too. All right? So that's the groove file that we actually had. But the only difference is now it's not running through the groove file in real time. It's actually just re-rendered as a new MIDI file. So again, this is a great way for you to get creative if you want to, especially if you don't know how to play swing or different styles of music. Just if you look at the groove list alone, you'll see that you've got cha-cha, you've got dance hall, disco, funk, hip hop, jazz, rock, swing, all different genres, all different styles of rhythm that you can choose from, right? So a really great way to get more creative. If you're stuck, if you ever feel stuck, like, oh man, all the drum beats that I write are now the same over and over again, slap a groove file onto it and see how it changes your productions, right? So there you go. That's like a kind of overview of the groove aspects of Ableton. It's really, really, really powerful and very, very helpful to get creative. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to I want to convert this MIDI drum thing into an audio file. Now you can freeze it, I guess, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another way in which I get to show you routing as well, because we haven't talked too much about routing, but it's a lot easier than Pro Tools. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new audio track right over here, and I'm going to call it drums print. Okay. I want to record these drums, the drums. I want to record the audio of that into a new clip. All right. So in order to do that, I need to get audio from here to go to here, from this track to this track. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my print track and click on, I want to take audio from the 909 core track, which is this. And believe it or not, it's actually that simple. See how it's recording? So what happened was it was just recording everything that the drums were doing in your 909 track. So that's the cool thing about Ableton. The routing is unbelievably simple, right? You just say, where do you want the audio from? Which track? Cool. Print. There. Done. Or if you want to record a microphone, external input or your interface, right? The other way to do it is, of course, go to Audio 2 and say that, hey, I want it to go to drum print, in which case you'll do the same thing. Right? And the reason why we didn't hear it, because it wasn't going to the master, but it's technically the exact same thing. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. All right, so now I'm going to mute my MIDI track, so I'm actually not gonna use this anymore. I'm going to use my drum print track because I want to look at an audio file because I want to get into the next part of what we're going to talk about today, and that is warping. So let's listen to this drum print over here. Right? And actually, just to keep things really simple, I'm going to print the very basic drums that we did. I don't want to get too complicated with this. Oh. What happened? Oh yeah, I muted it because I'm an idiot. There we go. Just going to record the basic drum beat. All right, now we're done with this. We can mute this and look at the print track. There we go. Basic drums in audio form right now, right here. All right. So one thing that I mentioned right at the top of doing Ableton is that whenever Ableton has audio files come into the session, even when whether you record it or import it, whatever, it analyzes the file for warp markers. If you don't remember what warp markers are, think about what we did in Pro Tools where we talked about elastic audio. Remember that elastic audio is Pro Tools' way of separating pitch from speed, and that allowed you to change the speed of your clips without affecting the pitch. Now you might be wondering, how is it that in Ableton we can speed things up and slow things down just by changing the project tempo up here, right? So remember, this was originally a beat at 160. I can slow it down if I want. Man, I'm not sure what's going on here. Didn't have this issue the other days. So you saw that I was able to slow it down, right? I'm going to say freeze track for now. All right. Actually, we don't even need this, do we? No, we'll keep it. All right, so you saw that I was able to slow it down. Same way, I can even speed it up, right? I'm slowing it down and speeding it up with no issues, no pitch change, nothing, right? And that's because Ableton analyzes every single audio file. Remember, this is an audio file. It analyzes every audio file for its warp markers. right? That's the beauty about Ableton and why it's much more of a production creative space. Yeah, speed things up and slow things down just as much as you want, with depending on how you feel, right? Now, because it always analyzes it for warp markers, whenever you load up a clip at the bottom over here, what you'll notice is that there are these little gray dots up here. And if you hover your mouse over them, they'll turn into these gray markers, which are technically, I guess you could call them like pseudo markers, right? Because we haven't actually engaged them yet. But you see that when you hover over these little white dots or gray dots, they turn into a little marker, a big thick marker. And then if you double click on them, it turns into an actual active warp marker. I pick things up and put them down. Huh? I don't get it. All right. So these are the warp markers that Ableton chooses to stretch your audio and compress, not compress in terms of compression, but reduce or speed up your audio versus elongate your audio. So what do I mean by that, right? Remember in Pro Tools when we did Elastic Audio, we had 4 different algorithms to choose from. We had rhythmic, we had monophonic, polyphonic, and vari-speed. Those were our 4 Elastic Audio algorithms, and based on whichever one we chose, it would affect the audio differently. And we discovered that certain algorithms were better for drums, others were better for vocals, some were better for piano and full songs, and some were just, if you wanted to fuck around and get that kind of tape effect, some were better for that, right? Now in Ableton, you have very, very similar algorithms, right? So if you go to your clip view, not only can you see the warp markers and the points. Remember, the warp markers are like the pillars that Ableton and Pro Tools use to stretch audio out and push them together, like slow down, speed up. But when you go to your clip view, not only can you see those warp markers, not only can you actually double click them and activate them, but you also see this little section over here, which you might have noticed before and not paid attention to. But this is where it says warp, which means that the clip is mapped onto the project tempo, and it's done so in preparation of needing to be warped. And then right under that, you see this thing called beats. And, some of you might be thinking like, oh yeah, beats. I like beats. No, that's not what they're talking about. Beats is the first algorithm that's being used to warp your audio based on the project tempo. So click on this and you'll see that all the different algorithms exist here, just like they did in Pro Tools. You have beats, tones, texture, repitch, complex, and complex pro, right? Now, if you understand the ones in Pro Tools, then you don't have to really think too much about these, but I will just say as a brief overall, beats is similar to rhythmic in Pro Tools, tones is similar to monophonic in Pro Tools, texture is similar to polyphonic in Pro Tools. Repitch is similar to vari-speed in Pro Tools. And then complex and complex pro are like the advanced versions of X-form polyphonic, right? So beats analyzes your waveform for the transients of the waveform. It puts warp markers at all the different transients. And then based on whether you slow something down or speed it up, it will stretch those warp markers further apart or pull them closer together, respectively, right? So when I select beats, I have the option to preserve transients. And what that means is warp markers will be placed at every transient that's been detected by Ableton. And you can even see that, right? Every single transient has its own little warp marker placed on it. Now, what I can do is, if I wanted to, I can change it to preserve different values. Like if I'm like, I only want it to do half bars or quarter bars, you can do that, but I do recommend for most drum things, I would say stick to transients, right? So what's happening is a warp marker is being placed at every transient that Ableton is detecting, and then between that first transient and the next transient, it's creating a little segment of audio. You could even call it a sample, but I won't call it a sample because that'll get too confusing. It's a segment of audio, and then the next segment, and then the next segment. So you have a bunch of segments going next to each other that are divided by their warp markers, right? Now, when you speed up your audio file, when you turn up the tempo of your project file, what happens is the two segments come closer and closer and closer together, and that's why it plays faster and faster, right? So if you have two segments like this, right, and you turn up the tempo, the warp markers get closer and closer and closer together, and that's what enables you to hear things faster. Oh shit, Brian. Oh my God. Or actually, John is your real name, right? I haven't seen you in a while, man. Good to hear from you. Hope you're doing well, man. And the reverse is true too. When you slow down your tempo, what's happening is your warp markers are moving further and further and further apart. Now it gets to a point where they move so far apart that it creates a gap between your actual audio segments, right? Now in Pro Tools, you would usually hear this as these weird little artifacts, right? You'd hear this kind of like zoom quality, like really kind of glitchy sounds. Well, in Ableton, it actually gives you the option of like, what do you want to go in between this gap, right? If you create a gap, what's going to go there? So just as a very basic scenario, let's play these drums and then let's slow it way down. You hear that choppiness? So what's happening is the audio segments, or rather the warp markers, are moving so far apart that the segments themselves are separating. So they're not connected to each other. Now the question is, what happens in between those segments, right? Right now, I have it set to what's basically just called off, right? So you can see right under transient, it says, it has this little arrow and a line through it. So all that means is when the segments get too far apart, that they create a gap in between the segments, just keep it silent. Play the segment, stop until the next segment comes. So it's pretty basic, right? But you get a really cool choppy vibe. It's super like robotic and stuff, right? The other options are loop forward and reverse. So loop forward, that option, what it does is, so you got your two segments, right? You slow down the beat so the warp markers move further and further apart until they separate the two segments. And then in between these two, there's a gap, right? And what's going to happen is it's going to fill it with the second half of the first segment, right? It's going to repeat that, and then it's going to repeat it again and again and again until you reach the second segment. So it kind of plays the first segment in loop until it reaches the second segment. So let's listen to that. You got to wear headphones. It's super glitched out. I love it. Woo! I love it. Oh man, that's so cool. So that's the loop forward, right? And then you have the loop forward and reverse, so the loop back and forth, which if you can put two and two together, you'll understand that once the segments move further and further apart, it's going to take the latter half of the first segment, place it, play it forward, then play it backwards, then play it forward, then play it backwards until you get to the second segment, right? And then you get a different kind of vibe. You get this kind of like almost like mini risers in between the beat. Next genre, glitch vibes. You heard it here first. Give me fucking credit for that shit. No, I think it already exists. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of like what I wanted to go over. That the preserving transients and then looping forward, backward, or just cutting off really gives you like these interesting vibes, right? Now, the thing that I really love about this and what I love to do with it is, check this out. So if we go to like 160, you know what? Yeah, so let's just play this beat. I'm gonna save as. I'm not sure why I'm not really doing anything, so I don't know why my computer's glitching out. It can handle way more than this. Don't know what's going on here. Very, very strange. Maybe go 256. Fine. What if I freeze this? So weird. I feel like that Zoom recording thing really threw off my whole computer. There you go. All right. Those plugins shouldn't be that heavy, but anyway, let's record some vocals, right? Command T for audio, set your input correctly, record enable, and then ba-da-da-da, right? Now, what I might want to do is, just to kind of give you guys the feel, I'm going to turn up the tempo to like 240, something ridiculous, and then record. Ran out of breath. So you might be wondering, why did you turn up the tempo? What's the use of that? Well, hold on, motherfucker. I'm about to show you. So remember that we were talking about beats mode. And what beats mode does is, depending on what you choose to preserve, you can preserve the transients or you can preserve based on grid, right? So let's say we wanted to do eighth notes. If you preserve based on eighth notes, keep it at beats, and you have like a vocal recording, check this out. Preserve eighth notes, and then make sure that you stop whenever the samples get too far apart. So now, watch what happens when I slow this back down to the original tempo, which was 160. Let's change it to 16th notes, baby. Woo! Yo, you can get so creative with this shit. It's wild. I don't want to like, go further than that, but just know that not only can you use warping in beats mode and these algorithms to just change the tempo up and down and make it sound as natural as possible, but you can make shit sound as unnatural as possible too. Like somebody said, who said it? I want to say whoever, I think it was Biggs. Yeah, I can't remember who Biggs is. But yeah, like if you can like make a nice little glitchy breakbeat, or like Ty said, like you can make glitchy beats, just being creative with this stuff, right? So anyway, I just wanted to show you that because I think that's a really cool feature. All right. So let's go back to drums real quick. Or actually, let's not go back to drums. Let's go back to this vocal sound. So the vocals, you can see that when you record them at an original tempo, which was 240, right? They sound pretty normal. And then when you slow them down, depending on the algorithm, it will change the effect. Now, for monophonic audio, like monophonic means one pitch at a time. Mono is one, phonic is sound, but in this context, it means pitch, right? For monophonic, we choose what's called tones. Okay, tones is the algorithm that allows you to warp monophonic audio as smoothly as possible. So now, if I set it to monophonic and turn the tempo down, see how it's a lot smoother? If I go back to beats, right? So this tones algorithm allows you to change the speed of monophonic audio without affecting the original sound too much. Just like in Pro Tools, where we chose monophonic for single vocal lines so that it wouldn't affect the audio too much, it wouldn't get too glitchy and weird. Same thing over here. It's called tones in Ableton. Now, right underneath that, you see this little thing called grain size. Now, I'm not going to get into these things too much, but just understand that when you're in beats mode, you're preserving the transients or any kind of grid value. But when you're in tones, you're not thinking about rhythmic values. Instead, Ableton views the audio basically like a whole sandbox, like a bunch of grains of sand. And choosing your grain size will give you an either more accurate or less accurate representation of your audio across different tempos. So there's no real easy way to like decide what your grain size should be, but just as like a general rule of thumb, when you have pitches that are like more defined, right? Like if you had like a piano sound and there was very, very defined pitches, or guitar, you want to choose lower grain sizes, right? Smaller grain sizes. But if you have pitches that are like a little bit all over the place and not really defined very well, like you're like, certain subs and 808s can get really wonky, that's when you want to turn up your grain size. So that's kind of a general rule of thumb. Yeah, it's like a gated effect. Yeah. We got Grammys. Funny. All right. So now, let's see if we can get, let's see. Before I move on to the next one, I just want to show you one more thing with the beats mode. So let's just go back to these drums. Right? So I told you that it analyzes all the different transients. Now, what I didn't tell you, or didn't go in depth into, is that you can double click these warp markers and select and move them. But remember from Pro Tools, whenever you select a warp marker, do not select it on its own, or else when you move it, it will move the entire clip form, right? And that's not necessarily what you want to do. So be careful. Whenever you select a warp marker, always select the one before and after the one you want to actually change. Now, the shortcut to do that is by holding Command on your keyboard and hovering over. Then all three get selected, right? Now, what you can do now is you can make your own interesting swing beat just by moving the warp markers. So check it out. So I'm going to move this here, maybe move this here, maybe move this here. Oh, before I do that, let's move this here, move this here, maybe move this here, move this here. So let's what happens is the warp markers are shifting the position of the transients that they are assigned to. Right? So you heard the difference, right? So let's just go ahead and move a bunch of these, right? So we can get something more interesting. Let's move this over here, move this over here. Move these over here. Move this over here. Move this. Move this. Right? Now this is the new drum beat. That's like some... It's like a really, really weird groove sound, right? So you can actually make your own patterns just by selecting the warp markers and shifting them around to make something more interesting. Remember, the original one was just a flat out drum beat, right? So I'm going to undo all that stuff. Right? Very simple, straightforward beat, but you can get creative and move stuff around, right? So that was something cool that I wanted to show you with warp markers. Now, on top of that, just to kind of close that thing out, hit a bass synth coming into... Yeah, exactly. So just to close out that conversation of warp markers and changing up your drum beats, remember that thing called grooves that I talked about a little second ago? What you can do is you can... In your audio clip, there's another place for you to add groove right here, just like in the MIDI. So if you click on this, it loads up your groove pool. You can then click on whatever you want and listen to what happens. Right? So you might be wondering, wait, how is it doing that? Because with MIDI, it makes more sense, right? Because if you had a MIDI file and you have a groove file and you want to map one to the other, it's really easy because MIDI is just these little digital notes that you can move around as when you want, right? So that's easy. So how is it doing the same thing but with an audio track or an audio clip? The answer is your warp markers. So everything that I just did with the warp markers, it's being done by Ableton through the groove file right here. So when I press commit and commit to the groove file, watch what happens to the warp markers and the actual audio. 1, 2, 3, boom. See how it moved everything based on the groove pattern and it moved it using the warp markers? So again, this is like a super, super cool way that you can get way more creative. Almost like you're like using Ableton's tools as like a producing partner. That's how I didn't even think about that until right now, but that's literally how I see it. It's like if Pro Tools is like your partner when it comes to mixing and mastering and recording and doing all that stuff, Ableton is your partner when it comes to producing beats and songwriting and doing live shows and live sets. Again, really, really powerful tool. So there you go. You've got monophonic for tones algorithm for monophonic. You've got beat for rhythmic elements. If we grab like a piano sound, like say. Let's see if we go, I don't know if I have, oh, there it is. Hip hop samples, hip hop loops, piano. All right, let's just load this guy up. Remember this one? And I'm going to pitch it down to C. Now this is a kind of crackly sample, so I'm not sure how it's going to react. But because this is using multiple pitches at a time, aka polyphonic, you would have to change your algorithm to a texture algorithm to get a little bit more of a natural sound if you were to change tempos up and down, right? So again, you've got your grain size, and then you've got this thing called flux, which is kind of like it's kind of hard to explain, but what it does is it adds like an element of like randomness to your samples. You can actually read it right there. larger value means more random. So let's go ahead and try to play with that. Why is there a huge delay between my phone and iPad? Because Google runs the world and they decide how you get your information. It just could be two different internet speeds, two different devices, there could be all kinds of reasons. So I would say use one or the other, or else you're going to hear me say the same thing twice. Say the same thing twice. So anyway, by changing up this value, you can get a little bit more of an accurate representation of the audio as you change tempo. See how it doesn't work on lower sizes? Higher works better here. So that kind of delay thing is not really that great. Now in this kind of case, if you can't really find something that works, because this is a very, very strange sample, the pitch is kind of weird and it's super crackly and undefined, I would actually change it from textures to complex. Complex and Complex Pro are the two advanced algorithms in Ableton, and it's primarily used if you have songs that you want to transpose. If you want to change the tempos and stuff like that, or warp in any kind of way, really, right? Better. So you can see that this needed a Complex Pro algorithm to actually work, right? So Complex and Complex Pro are really for like full-on songs. Like if you wanted to bring in a song that you liked, mess around with the tempo and the pitch and stuff, I would say go with Complex or Complex Pro. Textures would really be beneficial for when like you're using a little bit more of a cleaner sample, or like if you had vocal harmonies or stuff like that, it would probably work a lot better. And repitch you already know, right? So repitch, the easiest thing to show you is with drums. So if you go to drums, if we're in drums and we go to repitch, the pitch is going to change with the tempo. Right? This is just like your tape machine or like Varispeed in Pro Tools. Right? So that's your repitch or Varispeed. And Complex and Complex Pro are for when you have like full-on samples, right? So if I was to find, I think I already played this for you guys, but if we had like a sample in here and we just played, let me turn the volume down. So I guess this is like the original tempo, around 170. So if I change this to Complex Pro and slow it down. I just wanna dive in. I just wanna dive, dive, dive. I just wanna dive in. I just wanna dive in. I just wanna dive in. I just wanna dive, dive, dive. I just wanna. So you see how Complex Pro works really well with full-on songs? That's the key right there. Complex Pro is the most advanced algorithm here. I think it does better than Pro Tools in my opinion. But remember that it's quite the processor hog. So if you do too many Complex Pros, it's going to get really, really stressful on your computer and your processor, right? You don't have to join if you're already on Zoom. I'm sorry, already on YouTube, man. So, yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to go over. Now, look, you can go more into details into like what is the formants. As you can see, adjust the extent to which the formants of the sample are compensated when transposing. If you don't know what a formant is, it's kind of to do with like so if you think about your voice, right? Your vocal cords and the air produce a pitch, but then your throat, depending on how you shape it and how you do all those kinds of different shapes with your throat, it changes the characteristic of the sound, and that is technically what we would consider a formant. So the formants allow you to adjust how much of the formant is varied when you're doing the complex pro adjustment, and the envelope says that it influences the frequencies. So again, I wouldn't say like knowing the theory behind it is going to really help. I would say that knowing how to understand when to use what. So for example, like in textures, when I talked about grain size, or in tones when I talked about grain size, like lower grain size for defined pitches, higher grain size for undefined pitches. And in this case, like for the envelope, I think like 128 is standard, but then you can push it if you've got like more high-pitched songs or high-pitched scenarios. And the formants, again, it's something that you kind of have to play with a little bit. It's not really something that you can understand the theory behind and then apply it immediately. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. If you want to get more super technical on this, just ask me, and we can go over it in person. But like, it's really, I would say it doesn't make sense to really get too much into it. It's more about using your ears and adjusting the values to a point where you actually like them. And again, just use those general guidelines as a way to like get to what you want. But yeah, there you go. That's warping for you. I hope you had fun. Let's take it back to Zoom.